The dead of Winterfell watched with blind stone eyes as Eddard Stark descended into their company. Oil lamps hissed in the damp, a soft sibilant complaint that stirred the stale air of the crypt. The scent of old earth, of damp wool and cold iron, lived down here. The spring-fed warmth that wove through Winterfell's bones only softened the edges. He had come to speak to his sister, as he always did when a choice pressed on him hard as armor on a long ride. But the night had fallen with a drifting fog, and the godswood whispered uneasily. The pool lay black beneath the heart tree, and his own reflection stared back too plainly. He found his counsel better among the Starks of stone. He paused before the statue of Brandon the Builder to adjust the lamp and settle his breath. The great carved wolves at the king's feet crouched with their jaws parted in silent growls, moss and age rounding their fangs. Ned had learned their names as a boy, tracing the letters with a stiff finger while Maester Luwin intoned the lineages. The first kings, kings of winter, wardens when there had been no south or north, only night and the long cold. Lynna waited beyond. He took 3 more turns to reach her. His footsteps rang faintly. In life she had moved like a summer wind and laughed like light through leaves. In stone she had the look of a woman who had never laughed. Her eyes shaded and her hands folded around a garland of winter roses that would never fade. A chill lived under his sternum when he stood before her, not from the crypt but from memory. He let it wash through him and then laid his palm on the marble hem of her skirt. "I never meant for it to be this way," he told her. His voice jarred the quiet. "The boy grows," he asks, "and I have only silence to give him." The lamp's flame guttered as if a draft had found it. He sheltered it with his hand and listened. The crypts groaned sometimes with their own old age. A movement in the stone, a sigh from the hot springs. This was a different sound. A faint rattle, like pebbles in a jar. Then a tremor he felt through the soles of his boots rather than heard. The wolves' carved ears pricked. He looked along the ranks of the dead and, for a heartbeat, saw them as he had at 10. A silent host that could rise at any moment, drawn by his voice. A second tremor ran beneath his feet, and the lamp shook, its copper frame clicking. Far off, beyond Torrhen's statue, a whisper of falling lime dust drifted from a seam in the wall. He would have called for Jory then, or Luwin, or 6 men with pikes and coils of rope. Instead, he took 3 steadying breaths. Winterfell held secrets. It always had. The hot springs were a benevolent one, the warm stones in the floors another, the odd twist of a corridor that would return a wanderer to his starting place. When the builders had cut these vaults, the earth had not yielded easily. Caverns lay below, the maesters whispered, and older things than bone and iron. He set the lamp on the step beside Lynna's feet and moved toward the dust. He remembered the first time he had come down here alone, heart thrumming with newly won manhood, ashamed of the relief he'd felt when he emerged again into the rose light of evening and the smell of baking bread. Now he ran his hand along the dressed stone and found a fissure where there should have been none. It ran from the flagstones up under a king's stone cloak and across to his neighbor's shoulder, a seam not cut by chisels but grown, fine and recent. He pressed his ear to the divide. Warmth breathed against his skin. Not the steady warmth that rose from the springs, but a pulse, a throb of heat like a beast sleeping. He did not push away at once. He waited, and in the waiting he felt the old Stark stubbornness waken him like a blade sliding free of a scabbard. He had a levered iron bar stored in a nook near the steps for when stones settled and hands were needed to set them true. He fetched it and planted the tip in the seam below the waiting gaze of a Stark long dead. Iron rasped against stone. He put his weight behind it. The seam widened by the width of a fingernail. Then, too, dust sifted onto his boots. He put his back under it, and the wall gave with the reluctant sigh of an old man rising from a chair. A slip, a scrape, and a section of wall pivoted on some hinge buried in the stone, swinging inward just enough for a man to pass. Heat breathed out. It carried a smell he had known once in a Southron market when a brazier had overrun its fill and scorched the vendor's hair. The edge of burned meat and iron, the sharp sour of something ancient disturbed. He lifted the lamp and slipped through. The passage beyond was not dressed but bitten. a narrow fissure that widened after 3 steps into a pocket of carved space. It was more natural cave than crypt, with its swelling walls and sodden ceiling. Water beads hard as pearls clinging and dropping one by one into a pool that steamed in the lamplight. The steam coiled, taken by the draft like a living thing. Ned swept the lamp around and jerked when the light snagged on smooth, curved gleam. They lay in a cradle of old ash and black sand, half buried, 5 of them, no 2 alike. One was dark as coal veined with cream, another an uneasy green mottled with the bruised purple of a late plum, a third pale bronze shaded at the tips to rust, the 4th brown and dull like old leather. The 5th was so black it turned the light in on itself until the small, pearled nodules along its shell caught and reflected as if something moved inside. Ned did not know that he was holding his breath until the ache in his chest forced him to exhale. He set the lamp on a flat rock and went to his knees. He had seen dragon's eggs once in King's Landing when Rhaegar had been alive and the world had worn a different face. They had been set high for courtiers to crane their necks at, and the talk had been as much about the jewels on their stands as the eggs themselves. Those had been polished, smoothed by hands and pride. These were not trophies. He brushed the ash from the nearest with his fingers, and heat licked his skin through his calluses. He closed his eyes and saw Rhaegar's face as he had on the trident, wet with the river and blood, the rubies bursting off his armor like sparks. He saw Lyanna, her hair spread on a bed's pillow as if underwater. He saw Jon, thinner than Robb and quieter, a boy with a boy's hunger for knowing who he was. Beyond the hush of steam and the slow drip of water, he heard it again. A rattle, faint and tight, of something small and hard doing a patient work. He held his hand above the black egg. The heat there pricked him. He did not move it away. After a time, he withdrew the hand and bent his head until his breath tickled ash. He whispered no prayer. "God save me," he said to the eggs. "What would you have me do?" They did not answer. They did not need to. He rose and replaced the stone panel carefully as he left, setting it back upon its disguised hinge and testing the fit until he could barely find the seam with his thumb. He supposed courageous men had died for less in long-ago winters. Jory Castle's boots echoed on the stair not long after. Ned had sent a boy with orders and then waited by Lyanna while dust still tickled his throat, anger and awe wrestling in his blood. "My lord," Jory kept his voice soft. Even the living grew quiet in the crypt. "Find Maester Luwin," Ned said. "Tell him to bring his best lies." Luwin's chain of many metals clicked softly as he bent his head to the opening. The old man had a way of schooling his face to neutrality that had comforted many a panicked youth and foolhardy man. But even he forgot it for a heartbeat when the heat brushed him and the smell found his nose. His mouth made a small, precise O. He did not cross himself. Luwin had more iron than that. "Close it," he said at last. "Then tell me whose folly has dropped dragon's eggs under your family's feet." Ned eased the stone shut. The lamplight returned to ordinary dimness. He was suddenly conscious that his palms were sweat-slicked and crusted with ash. "If I knew that, I would not have sent for you. Could they have lain here since before the conquest?" Luwin's eyes had a speculative glint now, like a huntsman whose nose had caught a wisp of quarry's scent. "Before history sits a long, dark table, my lord, and we gropers at the far end." Valyria was not the first to bend the world into shapes it liked. The first men came early over their bridge of grass. That is true, but they did not craft dragon's eggs. No, these are not our people's works. He frowned. Yet heat hatches them. The springs beneath Winterfell might have been their mother. Who placed them? That answer could be 1,000 years dead. Or not. Ned wanted to tell him to destroy them. It came up in his throat, as much for Luwin's hearing as for his own. The world could have been spared so much if men had been braver at such moments. Yet he thought of Robert's broad face red with wine and anger at a name. He thought of Jon's small hand at 6 grasping his own in a crowd because he had been called bastard, and he had let it pass because that had been easier than a sword drawn in a hall. He thought of Lyanna's eyes when she had made him take a promise. Would fire destroy them? He asked. Luwin's mouth thinned. Fire never did dragons harm. It woke them. Cold may unmake them. The deep cold, or salt, or plain neglect. He lifted a hand, let it fall. I would counsel caution and silence. No raven, no rumor. Hide them and watch. If they rattle and break, then, he swallowed abruptly. There are accounts, crude ones. They will need meat. They will need to be kept from men until they have a bond. No, don't look at me as if I were a boy reciting wonders. Bonds are recorded, ettered. With singers' sweetening stripped away, they remain. Ned did not like the word, bond. It suggested chains and oaths and things a man could not slip. Yet he had bound himself to worse with less to show for it. He put his hand on Luwin's shoulder. You will help me keep this secret. I am very old, my lord, Luwin said with dry patience, and very tired, but not so tired I have forgotten how to shut my mouth. A secret is like a tumor. It grows until it eats its host. Best we starve this one with discipline. I will say nothing, but I will also not shield you from my counsel if my mind changes. Say nothing to Caitlin, Ned said at once, surprised as he heard himself. No one, not yet. Luwin's cheek twitched. Not even to the one person whose counsel you trust when your own honor strangles you? Bold, or fearful, wise, Ned said, more sharply than he had intended. You know my lady's history with that house. I know good women take fright at flames for reasons that have nothing to do with rationality, Luwin returned, unoffended. And I know that if these do hatch, you will not be able to hide them from your wife or your 10-year-old daughter for long, nor should you, but I will hold my tongue for a little while at your request. Even wisdom bows to necessity in its turn. When the maester had gone and Jory with him, Ned stood alone by Lyanna's statue again, the small lamp pooling light at the hem of her skirt, the silence a tight skin stretched around a new beating heart in the earth. He had wanted counsel. The gods had given him a dilemma. He did not sleep much that night. When he did, he dreamed of doors and hinges that moved at a touch, of wolves slinking through narrow cracks to warmth, of something thin as a knife sliding through a shell and opening a world. In the morning, he rose before the castle's ordinary stirrings and went to the practice yard with his son. Robb moved well for a boy, broader through the chest than Ned had been at his age, quick in a way that would make him a competent, perhaps even an excellent lord of men. John was there as well, with broken sleep under his eyes and the sideways patience he had learned since his earliest years. Ghost padded at his heel. The white wolf's coat had the uncanny way of drawing light. In a drift he disappeared save for the kohl of his eyes and the shadow of his nose. Again, Ned told the boys, and they moved, their blunted blades kissing and glancing. Balance, John. Robb, your lead foot drags. He corrected their hands, tested their wrists. He could not look at John and not see a shell under stone and heat licking out of a seam. He could not look at Robb and not see the weight the boy would inherit and how it would crush or temper him. When the bout ended and Robb grinned with sweat in his hair and Theon Greyjoy heckled from the wall, John lingered. It was not his way to ask, but he was better than anyone Ned had ever known at waiting until a man wanted to speak. Eddard Stark had made a life of not speaking when tempted. Today his throat ached with all the unsaid things. Walk with me, he said. They went to the Godswood and stood under the bleeding face of the heart tree where the quiet pooled. Leaves rotated slowly in the shallow breeze like a hand rolling a coin. I have kept something from you, Ned said, and the words sounded clumsy in his mouth, like a sword in a hand gone cold. John's face tilted, open and guarded at once. He was a winter boy, he could do both. My mother, he said. That too, Ned said. The trunk's white smoothness looked like bone. I gave your aunt a promise. I cannot break it yet. The muscle along John's jaw jumped. He never asked outright. When he had, once as a small boy, the answer had been ice. He nodded now very slowly. Then why bring me? Ned forced himself to let that gem he hoarded go. Because you wish to see, and because you are not made to wait on empty benches with other people's children. Because you are mine, John. Whether I speak a name aloud is a different thing than what my heart knows. John's breath caught. Ned led him to the crypts by the door in the yard behind the old smithy. They took no lamp. Jon needed no light there. He had come often by stealth and grief to the place where his own soul's walls were made. Ghost ghosted ahead, his paws silent on the steps. Ned touched the seam and felt the heat bite his skin like an eager hound. He had intended to speak at length, about song and steel, about oaths and traps, about the way a choice made for love could chain a life. But when he pushed the stone aside and the breath of the cave touched them both, Jon inhaled like a man who had been underwater too long. He went to his knees without being told, his hand hovering, not daring, then daring, settling on the black egg. It rattled under his palm. Ned did not reach out. He watched his boy's face, watched it change, losing all its careful defenses and all its sourness in a pool of pure wonder. Ghost's ears went flat. The wolf sank onto his haunches and made a small, questioning sound. The black egg cracked along a thin, crooked line.
Gås have mercy, Ned whispered.
A slim, dark nose like wet leather wedged into the seam. The shell split with a patient, ruthless motion. Ned had seen foals break their damn skin with wet hooves. He had watched a litter of pups push into the world red and blind, the bitch ferocious and tender by turns. What rose here was not helpless. It came with a knowledge folded inside it, a purposeful certainty. It slid from the shell in a spill of fluid and dark sand. It was not so large as Ghost's head. Its wings were too big for its narrow body, their membranes clinging and glistening. It turned its head and looked at Jon with eyes that were, for a moment, not at all like a beast's. Too nakedly present, too quick. Then the beast was there also, climbing atop the shape of that first look. It opened its mouth and hissed. Steam curled out where a breath touched cool crypt air. Jon's hand had not moved from the shell. His left lifted. He extended his fingers. The little thing came on two splayed black paws, set one on Jon's thumb, another on the ridge of his palm, sniffed the whorls of his skin, then laid its head against Jon's wrist with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a creature that had found the only thing that made sense. Jon made a sound Ned had never heard from him. A small, helpless, choked laugh. "How," he said hoarsely, "could this be? People put things where they should not," Ned said. He could not make his voice gentle. He was too raw. "And the world keeps its own counsel." The hatchling made a sharp, bird-like noise and shook itself. Ash clung to its back, forming stars no one else would ever see. It spread its wings, and the lamplight from the rock, feeble as it was, took the skin of them and showed Ned a web of finer bones than a sparrow's, and veins, and the thin, trembling strength of something made to learn air. "What will we call him?" Jon asked, abrupt and boyish. He flushed, as if the question had tumbled out ahead of thought. "Her," he corrected, peering. Red fringed the inside of the membraned mouth, a clean, raw color that made Ned think of meat in a butcher's stall. "I think she is a her. Will you be fool enough to keep a fire-breathing beast and not name it?" Ned said. "Then she will be named whether you speak it or not. Names are chains too, Jon. They hold a thing to the world." He looked at the hatchling's ash-sugared spine, at the way the light found a pale edge on each scale as the minute ridges dried. "Make it a short chain." Jon made a face, then smiled in spite of himself. He looked at Ghost as if asking his counsel. The wolf's head had cocked. His black eyes were on the new creature, unblinking. The little dragon loosed a clicking chatter and Ghost's whiskers twitched. Jon put his palm on the pup's head as much to steady himself as to settle the wolf. "Ember," he said. The little one wrote the sound in the air with a turn of her head. Then tucked herself under Jon's hand as if she had been waiting. A second rattling came from the bruised green egg. Ned's head went sideways by reflex. Jon shifted, his body forming a shield without thought. This one cracked slower, with little purposeful chips rather than a slice. The hatchling that dragged itself free was longer and thinner. Its eyes were pale as lichen on old stone. It raised its head at once and hissed defiantly, as if aware that it would never be as strong as the first. It did not move toward Jon. It moved to the heat of the steaming pool and laid its neck along the stone rim as if it had crossed leagues to do only that. "What will we do?" Jon whispered, not looking away. Ned listened to the drip and hiss and the small alive noises. The North had a way of taking a man's choices and simplifying them until there was only one path left, like a deer track through a thicket. "We will do what we have always done," he said. "We will endure. We will guard what must be guarded and bleed for it if we must. We will feed them quietly and teach them not to take fingers and songs. We will not tell Robert. Or if I do tell him, it will be because I am dying and there is no other choice." Jon looked at him then. He saw the king's name come and go across his father's face like a shadow of a hawk's wing. "He will kill them," Jon said. "He will try," Ned said. He felt very old and very awake. No words like dragon have lived gently in Robert's house. Or any house. By the time they sealed the wall again, Jon's hands were stained with ash and trembling. He tucked the trembling into his sleeves. He had already learned that trick from the world. Ned looked once over his shoulder at Lyanna's face. He did not ask her forgiveness. He did not think she would have been pleased. Catelyn came to him that night when the children slept and the castle had cooled to its steady heartbeat. He sat by the window with a cup he did not drink. She had the stillness in her that meant she was praying not to be set to a hard thing. He wished he could give her only soft things to carry. He had never been that man. "My lord," she said, deliberately light, and when he did not smile she tilted her head. "If it is the king's letter that troubles you." "The king's letter is a winter storm," Ned said. "It will come or pass and we will endure either, as we always do." She came and set her hand on his shoulder. He put his palm over hers. Her fingers were long and strong. He had loved those fingers once for the way they had held to him as if he had been a floating log in a river, and loved them since then for the unremarked competence they brought to everything. Bundling a child, stitching a hem, quieting a quarrel without a sword in sight. "There is something else," she said, too astute to leave the shape of a thing unexamined. "There is always something else," he said, and the lie did not sit right in his mouth. He turned to face her. "I have sent for more meat from the west pastures. Better to dress a confession in practical clothes and see how it walked." "More meat," she searched his face. "Is there hunger I have not seen?" "Not yet," he said, "but there may be." "Are we feeding an army?" she asked lightly. "Has Benjen sent the watch down to dine and never told me? There are nights enough I think he would rather sup at my table than his own." He had meant not to tell her. He had meant to be wise and closed as Luwin had counseled. But he had been married too long to make a fortress of his face and keep his lady at the gates. "There are beasts in the crypts," he said. She drew breath and held it. He watched her eyes like a man in a boat watches the river's surface for the turn that means a rock. "Wolves?" she asked. "Rats large enough to beg a place at the table?" She tried a smile and let it die. She had been told too many songs about kings and dragons as a child. She had lived through Robert's War. "Not wolves," he said. "Say it," she whispered. "Dragons." Her hand lifted and returned to his shoulder as if she had reached toward a candle and thought better of it.
No diest.
"No, not a tale from the Kennel Boys to try my faith. No." She closed her eyes a moment. When she opened them they were clear and angry and something else he respected. Steady. "And you did not tell me at once because you are right to fear what most men and women fear," he said. "And because I am bound to our children and to a promise and to a king, and sometimes those ropes knot in ways I do not know how to cut. If Robert hears, he will hunt. If the wrong ears take a whiff of this, the South will be on us like flies on a dead thing, Catelyn. I would not have that stink here. You have put a fire under our feet," she told him, "and told me to stand still." "No," he said quietly. "I have told you to stand with me." She held his gaze, and then her mouth softened in a way that broke him as surely as a blow. She was brave, his lady, as brave as any in plate and mail. Her bravery had simply taken different shapes. "How many?" "2 hatched today," he said. "3 remain. They may sleep forever. Or wake. I do not know." "How large?" "As your arm," he said. "Smaller, quick, hungry, too knowing by half." Caitlyn's hand went to her throat and stayed there. And John? Ned's lip curved. He could not help himself. He was with me. He has taken to the first. Of course. No acid. No bitterness. The gentleness she laid on John when the world galled her had never been a sham. She simply did not know where to put him. None of them did. What of the king? Nothing, he said. He must not know. He will go into the crypt, Caitlyn said softly. Robert will want to feast with our dead, as he always has. He will want to stand by Lyanna and remember being 17. He will tell you what he might have done and what he is glad he did not. He will call for wine. He will look at your father in stone and pretend he does not know. That two men can be father and not father both. How will you keep him from the eggs with all his boars blundering? I will throw a feast so noisy it shakes the mortar, Ned said, and she laughed unwillingly. I will put Arya's spear in his hand and let her drag him to the yard to teach him to dance. I will cut the stone out of the wall and bury it and mortar it back so beautifully you will not be able to see the seam when you hold your nose to it. You never could see what you did not choose to see, she said. Then help me choose wisely, he said, and he meant the plea. She lifted her chin. We will do this, she said after a moment. But I want guards at the door. Jory's men whose wives I know. Luwin will draw a sign on the lintel only we see, and Arya will be told to keep her feet above ground for a fortnight. She will not obey, Ned said. Her feet are married to ladder rungs. Then I will sew them to the floor, Caitlyn said with a flash of humor that was half pride. We will feed your monsters from our own stores. Vayan will scowl at me and I will scowl back, and nothing will escape this hall. He disassembled the hidden hinge the next morning with Micken's iron chisels and all the patience he had ever learned, while Luwin peered over his shoulder and a lantern smoked. They cut and reset stones until Ned's arms ached. When it was done, the seam lay invisible as a healed wound. If he had not known, he would not have known. For a week, Winterfell behaved as it always had. The gods would whispered, the kitchens shouted and steamed. Robb and Theon sweat and bragged and went to the kennel to admire Grey Wind's growth. Sansa and Jane Poole embroidered and whispered and eyed younger squires who preened in the yard. Arya vanished like a trout at the first shadow on the stream. Bran climbed, Rickon tumbled, Maester Luwin taught. Men mended fences and moved sheep and spoke of storms. At night Ned went to the crypt alone with a butcher's wrapped gifts beneath his cloak. Ember swelled from the length of his hand to the size of a cat. Her wings stiffened and learned the language of bone and air. The thin green clung more stubbornly to the steam, eyes half-lidded in bliss by the pool's edge. But when Ned set a small haunch of meat on the rock, its head lifted and struck like an adder. Luwin came twice, denying himself speech as if he were abstaining from wine. He wrote notes in a crabbed hand and burned them, then rewrote them and burned them again. Keep them warm, he said once, incapable of letting a counsel lie unheard in his throat. Keep them fed, and keep them unseen, above all. You are an old woman, Ned told him. Old women survive winter, Luwin returned. The royal party's ravens arrived 3 days before the king. Riders clattered up the King's Road in the morning, dust pale on them as a second skin. Thunder all day as if the sky were on hooves. Caitlyn's hand in the ordering of banners and bustle was deft. Squires ran like foxes. Vayan Poole found wine. Septa Mordane found Sansa's patience and rinsed it briskly of sulk. Arya lost and found her needle 3 times. Bran climbed the towers to see the banners coming and shouted their colors down to Rickon, who invented ones only he could see and shouted back. Robb tried not to stand taller for his father's gaze. Theon stood easy and laughed at nothing and kept a hand near a dagger because that is what men had taught him to do when in company. Ned went to the crypt once in the afternoon to watch Ember eat. She tore at the meat with a dragon's impatient delicacy, tugging and shaking the sinew free of bone in quick jerks of her arrowhead head. She had eyes like a keen winter day, clear, cold, assessing. The green John had christened that one soot for a private joke that had made him grin into his sleeve. Leaned into the steam. When Ned stood, both heads turned to him. He felt the weight of their attention and something else as well, something like the attention of the heart tree when a man stood close and set his hand upon it and let the faces under bark watch him without mercy. That night, Robert came. He came as he had always come, with noise and meat and love of the past. He smelled of horse and sweat and wine and the road. He crashed into Ned's arms and thumped his back until Ned's teeth clicked together. He kissed Catelyn's cheeks and made a joke about her beauty that would have embarrassed a courtesan. He ordered ale and ribs and drums for the hall and slapped Tyrion Lannister upon the back and misnamed 2 of Ned's men and remembered Jory with a frankness that would have been impossible in a sober man. He put his fingers in Arya's hair and called her a wildcat and earned a grin that struck him as it struck Ned. Square in the place where the world had gone quiet and heavy. He wanted to go to the crypt. It took them both most of the night to get him there. They drank. They told lies about their youth that tasted better than most truth. Robert shouted at the bards and made them sing braver songs for the Starks, and then, as he always did when words higher than his head took hold, his voice went quieter and he said, "Take me to her." Ned did what he had always done. He took him. They went with 2 torches and no guards. Robert did not like other men to see him weep. The steps took some of the swagger out of him. His breath caught halfway down. At the statue, he put his hand on Lyanna's stony knee as if he had a right to it, as if putting his flesh on her stone could wipe the history away. Ned stood with his torch held steady and planned escape routes to hard silence in his head. He would trip and spill ash. He would cry out about a twisted ankle. He would be a fool in front of his king for the sake of creatures he should fear more than he did. Robert's shoulders began to shake. He was as broad as ever. Broader, a bull grown into a boar, but grief had grown broader as well. It had no mercy on girth or age. She should have been queen, he said, as he always said. Ned had no answer. He had never had an answer to that lie that did not end in another funeral. A small sound, a thin chirp, drifted across the crypt before any lie could even form. Robert's head jerked up. Ned's hand clenched on the torch. He tasted soot. He could tell you the shape of every stone down here if pressed. He could tell you which bore the hint of an old chisel and which had been worn smooth by hands. He could not even have said whence the sound came. It was one of those betrayed secrets that slip out of their own accord, like a child's laugh in a place that requires silence. He swallowed. "Bats?" he said flatly. Robert scowled into the darkness. "Bats?" he repeated, as if the word had offended him. "I hate bats. Fly into your hair and shit where they please. Bats and Targaryens." Ned made himself breathe. "My lord," he said very gently, "she would not have liked to see you here like this. Let me have my illusions, Ned." Robert gripped the stone and kissed his fingers and set them again on Lyanna's knee and bowed his head. The old anger went across his face like a cloud, and then the years settled heavy and he let some of it go. The chirp came again, fainter and from a different angle, as if it had been shrugged away by a draft. Robert did not notice. He talked to Lyanna as he always did, and Ned stood guard and felt the crypt about him like a man feels a dark forest and knows that eyes open there and count his days. When they climbed back into the castle and the warm breath of men and beasts and soup met them, Ned's knees felt hollow. No one saw. Catelyn came and took Robert's arm with the effortless grace of a woman who had learned to shepherd a drunk kindly without making him feel shepherded. Ned caught a glimpse of Jon at the hall's edge. He stood half in shadow, as was his habit, Ghost a pale smudge beside him, and in his arms something that could have been a bundle of cloth or a forgotten old cloak. Ember's small head lifted and turned under that fold, eyes like chips of winter catching and holding Ned as if he were the only stationary thing in a spinning world. The feast was a noisy miracle of survival. Robert told dirty jokes. Tyrion made 3 good ones at his own height's expense and 3 better ones at no expense at all. Jaime Lannister lounged and shone his disdain as if it took no effort. Cersei wore green and a look like a sword in silk. Sansa dazzled brighter than her gown, so proud her father thought she would float. Arya fidgeted and wiped grease on her sleeve and earned a twitching mouth from Catelyn that was almost a smile. The musicians played. The torches shed a smell like fat and memory. Under the table, a beast that had last slept in the world before Valyria sucked on a bone with a delicate rasp. Every time the small rasp sounded, Jon's hand moved to cover the bundle. Ghost lay with his chin upon his paws and did not twitch even when Theon set his boot near his tail. Loyalty ran in that wolf like iron or in a mountain. In the morning, Bran climbed. Ned would remember that morning in a wash of small details. The way the frost on the rampart looked under a gray sun, the sound of an argument blooming like a sickness behind a closed door, the sense, sudden and precise, that the castle itself had held its breath because a child had made a choice. Bran climbed. He did not fall because of the climbing. He fell because when you put more than one secret into a place, they begin to warp the air around them and call to each other. He had reached as high as he had ever gone, light breath in his lungs like a small proud bird, when men's voices turned into something else. A silence with teeth in it, and then a name that should not be said the way it was said. His father's name and not his father's name, tales of kings and queens and the way a woman's body could be used and used again. He turned to go, careful and sure, and saw gold. When he fell, the wind did not even have time to decide what to do with him. The ground took him into itself as if it had been waiting. Ned heard the cry from the yard and did not distinguish it from the shout a man made when the honey warmed too quickly and boiled over and burned him. He walked to the door with his cup in his hand, and then he was running and calling, and the world had torn a hole in itself at the sight of Robin's face white as lamb fat and Jon's mouth a silent curse and Catelyn's fingers already wet with blood that did not belong to her. He came to the boy. He had picked him up when he was a howling thing, and he picked him up again now, and he weighed nothing, as if the fall had knocked everything out of him except a terrible fragility. The castle turned into a hand and tried to hold them and failed. Bran lived. For a night he lay and made sounds like a bird's small lungs trying to remember air. The second night he slept without noise, and the third night the stranger with the knife came. Catelyn had not left the bed. Ned had tried to drag her from it, not cruelly but purely, because he would rather have fought every man who ever came to him with grievance than see the way her love wrote itself on a body that was shaking with cold and weariness. He had left to keep himself from begging. He went to the yard. He went to the crypt. Ember licked his fingers with a rough, hot little tongue and curled into the hollow of his palm and made a sound like wind in a reed, and he almost laughed for the first time since the ground had opened under his son. He put his head in his hands and listened to water falling once and then again and understood less than he had the day before. Later, when they told him what had happened, that a man had slid into his own house like a shadow and tried to take Bran's life with a blade that did not belong in a Southron's hand, and that a woman who had not slept had fought with her fingers and taken a cut to the palm that would scar in. Hold that scar until the day she died, he listened without moving. When they told him how Bran's direwolf had come like winter's patience at last, refusing its own quiet and torn the stranger's throat out in one appalling efficient bite, he went to the stables and untied a small, sleeping goat and carried it under his arm to the crypt. Ember did not rage when he slit the goat's throat. She was still, and then she was fast, and then she was sated, and her eyes were old. The green soot uncoiled from the steam and took 2 neat strips and returned to the heat. Ned wiped his hands on cloth and let his mind make shapes it had not allowed before. Valyrian steel had glimmered in a stranger's hand in his son's bed. That was a Southron message if ever one had been written. It said things he did not want to read. Catelyn left for King's Landing after, with Roderick Castle and a region's worth of determination, to follow the blade to its hand. Ned let her go because he could not hold her. He watched her from the battlement as she rode out, and in his belly the thought that this was all going to end with him south again sat heavy as hunger and twice as dangerous. He did not want to go. He would go. He had never been allowed to be the sort of man who could refuse a king's asking. Robert had asked, and more than the hand's chain had been tied about Ned's neck long ago. He had meant to tell Jon nothing. He had meant to be a coward in that small way to preserve his courage in larger things. Instead, on the morning the king told him again, more sober than he had been in months, that he needed his old friend and his old friend could not refuse him. Ned took Jon down into the crypt and let the boy hold the little thing he loved most. Ember had found the steps. She had learned the route by scent and mathematics and a beast's cleverness. She had edged her wings against the angle of the stone and crept upward one door at a time until the seam took her. She did not understand walls as men did. To her, they were whether to be waited on. Jon had woken that morning with warm weight in the crook of his arm, and a nose pushed into his throat, and a warmth that had nothing to do with sandstone. He had hidden that warmth under his cloak and gone to Luwin with a face like a man going to war. Luwin had said no, and then yes, and then turned to ashes in his own mouth because he was fond of the boy and fonder of his honor, and neither of those things had helped anyone, ever, that Ned had known. "I want to go to the wall," Jon said in the crypt with Ember's head tucked under his jaw. Now that she had learned the taste of air beyond the cave, she shivered when shut away. His voice did not shake. It had taken him months to come to this sentence. He had worn it thin in his mind and found it still good. "There is nothing for me here. Robb is heir. Sansa and Arya hate each other in the way sisters do. Bran will wake or he won't, and he will climb again in his head if he cannot with his feet. Rickon will grow. My place." "Your place," Ned said, "because sometimes a man must hear his own foolishness, is on a wall where men with no names teach me not to be what I am," Jon finished, a bitter little twist to his lips that did not belong to a boy. "And your dragon?" Ned asked softly. Jon's hands went around Ember's ribcage. She tolerated the embrace with the grace of a creature who had already decided about a person and would not revise that decision unless absolutely necessary. "She will fly." "Where?" Ned asked. Jon swallowed. "Here, where she was born, where she will not be killed for it." "By whom will she be fed?" Ned asked very gently. Jon closed his eyes. "Not by me," he said. "A boy at the wall cannot feed a dragon in his lord father's house. I know that much at least." Ned let the silence sit between them until it softened. He could feel the choices like the ribs under his hand when he set it on Ember's side. "I am going south," he said. He thought he would resent the shape of the words when they left his mouth. He did not. He felt relief in them, like a man who has been balancing too long on one foot and can finally step. "The king requires me. The realm requires me, or so men say. And when men say that to a Stark of Winterfell, he listens even if the very earth of his house is telling him to stay." Jon looked up at once, not with resentment but with an old pain that had not found words and still would not. "Take me." "No," Ned said. Then, because he had promised himself not to die with a certain secret rotting him from within, he reached and put his hand on the back of Jon's neck. "I will not take you because I cannot keep you safe there. I cannot keep any of them safe there. I cannot keep myself safe there. Men I do not trust will be eager to shape you if I take you into their hands. Here I have men I have made. Here you have the crypt and the godswood and the means to feed a fire in stone." Jon had thought he had no more tears for this particular subject. He did not cry now. He put his forehead against his father's shoulder and stood very still and breathed slowly until the world stopped bucking under his feet. "And my mother?" he asked, so quiet Ned barely heard him over the drip of water. Ned closed his eyes. In the dark he was 21 and 25 and every age where he had thought duty a neat, handsome thing. "When the time is right," he said. His voice barely worked. "When the wall between the living and the dead thins. When my duty will not kill us both. I will tell you." "You always say that," Jon said, but without heat. Ember made a small, complaining noise. He lifted his head and wiped his cheek with the back of his wrist. "Do you know what Soot did yesterday?" Ned coughed and let him walk them away. "What did Soot do?" Jon's mouth curved. He put his nose in the pool and sneezed. "Luwin says that means he has decided to live. I think it means he doesn't like getting wet. Wiseby. East," Ned said. "I like him better each day." On the day Ned's party set out for King's Landing, the sky was a clean high blue that promised a hard winter after a soft autumn. Robert clasped him and clapped his back and made a jest about southern breezes thawing northern bones. Sansa cried and was furious at herself. Arya sliced the air with her little sword when she thought no one was looking. Robb looked at his father the way young men have always looked at their fathers when the first axe grips their palms and they see how close a cheek can be to a blade. Jon did not come to the yard. Ned found him in the godswood with Ember folded small under his long cloak and Ghost's head on his knee. The heart tree watched them all and said nothing. "Keep her," Ned said. He had a riding cloak and food and tools and one husband. Truth. He had never had so few possessions and felt so heavy with wealth. "Keep them both. Feed them. Hide them. Grow them." "I am not a lord," Jon said. "Sometimes, when the house is dark and wolves circle, it is not the lord who must hold the door," Ned said. "Sometimes it is the boy the door will not yet admit." Ghost did not move. Ember stretched and yawned a line of heat into the cold. Ned kissed Jon's hair, quick and fierce as a man putting a brand on his own chest, and walked away. He took the king south. The king took his youth with him. The road took the small illusions men keep the way a fire takes dry grass. Ned had never been a man who told himself comfortable stories, and he did not begin now. He let the South do what it always did. It unmade and remade him in its own shape. At Winterfell, there was meat for 2 more weeks before men asked questions. Vayen Poole appeared in Catelyn's solar with a ledger open and a suspicion he had dressed as concern. "There is loss," he said, tapping a page with a clean, bitten nail. "Mutton tallies do not match. Could be wolves. The old woman in the mill says the gods have grown hungry. She says the heart tree is asking for more." "The gods can wait," Catelyn returned, while the back of her hand tightened against the new scar in her palm. "Perhaps the miller's son needs a lesson in counting. Perhaps wolves have found sleekness with summer's abundance. I will see to it." She saw to it by giving Jon more work in the morning and letting him vanish in the afternoons with a basket and a rope and 2 loyal sergeants whose wives had sworn by the weirwood to keep their tongues. Mikken shored up a new hinge where the old had been pried away. Luwin watched and did not watch, shaking his chain when he thought no one heard him. Arya found him once in the corridor and peered up at him under a tangle of hair. "You're hiding something," she said, guileless as a knife you had not seen. "I am always hiding something," Luwin said. "Knowledge. The taste of lemon cakes when someone else is hungry. Curses. Teach me some," Arya said at once. He looked down at her and almost laughed. "Not the ones you want." She did not find the new seam. She found 100 other things. A messy trick of pulling string with one hand while holding a knife in the other. A way to disarm a boy larger than she by stepping inside his reach and using his body against him. The look on Jon's face when Ember poked her nose out past his collar and sniffed Arya's cheek. "Oh," Arya whispered. It was not a word anyone else would have understood from her. "Oh, we call her Ember," Jon said. "You may touch her if she wills it." Arya held out a hand and froze when warm breath panted over her fingers. Ember's little rough tongue came out and gave Arya a cautious lick. Arya laughed in a way that made Ghost lift his head. Arya wiped her cheek and said, "If Sansa sees this, she will die." "She will not die," Jon said, calm as a bell. "She will be angry, and then she will talk of it to Jane and laugh, and then she will forget." "She will never forget," Arya corrected, with elder sister authority, which amused Jon more than it should have. "She keeps things, like a bird who fills her hair with odd bits until her head is heavy and she cannot fly." "Do not speak unkindly of Sansa to me," Jon said at once. "I love her. She may never see me, but I love her." Arya scowled that he had forced softness into the conversation where she had wanted mischief. Then she sighed because she did love Sansa, in the fashion of a girl who had once twined fingers with her sister and fallen asleep with their legs tangled like vines because the world was full of noises and Sansa had been better at ignoring them. "You are a fool," she informed Jon. "I love her too." "Then be kind," Jon said. "Then teach me to hide a dragon." She shot back, and he felt his face go hot. After, Arya would prove a better vault than anyone expected. She took instruction as if born to it. She did not tell Sansa, because a secret like that would have killed Sansa with its weight. She told the tree. The heart tree took it and grew it like a ring in wood. The gods had hidden older things than dragons. Bran dreamed. His body lay square and patient as the smithy's table, heartfelt and indifferent care layered over it hour by hour. The old stories came and curled under his tongue, and he took them in, knowing when a boy's dream is different than another set of eyes choosing a perch. He ran with wolves. He touched the pool's surface and was not wet. He saw a door where a door had never been. He saw hot breath rising from black eyes without pupils and teeth that were not made for chewing and did not try to gnaw him. The world had decided to show him everything, as if to apologize for taking his feet. In one dream, he went down into the crypt not on his own legs but on a different sort of bone. He saw his father and a boy with a white wolf and a creature like a bat and a horse and a lizard all in one. He tasted ash. He woke from that dream without waking his eyes and smiled in his chest, a thing that made his fingers twitch under furs and made his mother lift her head and put her hand on his brow. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay." South men were doing what they always did. They swore oaths and wriggled. They set wine cups on polished wood and twisted facts into shapes they could love. Ned learned about a little man's broad intelligence and a broad man's little mercy. He learned about the small, sharp smiles women wore when war was being made in a room without swords. He learned how a city breathes and eats and shits and keeps itself from drowning in its own filth by sheer ferocity. He learned that a king who had been a hero had become a man whose delights were cruelties he did not allow himself to see. He dreamed of heat. He dreamed he stood beneath the heart tree and that it was in leaf when it should have been bare, and that a thing with wings folded itself into the notch between root and trunk and lay very still with one bright eye open, holding the world in that unblinking looking until Ned himself felt his enormous, clumsy human gaze waver and go thin like soap. He woke and his right hand, felt warm as if held too close to a fire. He did not tell Robert any of it. He would sooner have told Robert the truth about John, and that was a road he could not walk without losing everything he was trying to keep. Letters came from the north by Raven. Bran's hand twitching, Sansa's careful polite paragraphs about ladies who had admired her dress, Arya's splattered sheet with a drawing of a cat that had sharp enough ears to be almost accurate, Rob's tidy account of men's movements in stores and fences, Luwin's measured counsel. Catelyn's hand was absent. He made no song for that. She was walking her own road, and he trusted her as much as he trusted anyone. He trusted her more than he trusted himself. He held that trust like a coin under his tongue and did not spend it on comfort. He sent a letter back. The words he put in it were not the ones he wanted to. He wrote of patience and prudence and sent his love and a thin, precise set of instructions that could have been about winter stores and were about something else entirely. Feed them often, he wrote. Feed them small. Keep the bone. Let the wolves smell them and make their own decision. Do not force. Do not starve. Warmth is our ally and our enemy both. Luwin read that and chewed on his lip and then asked for another cup of small beer. In winter, hot springs that have steamed all summer become a blessing men do not mock in their cups. In winter, things that have been hiding decide if they will sleep or wake. Ember grew 2 new spans of skin along her wings and cracked 3 small teeth and replaced them with sharper ones in the space of a fortnight. Her breath changed when she yawned. It made a sound that was the beginning of a roar and not yet the thing itself. Soot discovered a lizard in the warm cracks of the stone and ate it with reverence like a man taking sacrament. Ghost allowed both creatures near his flank and put his teeth gently on Ember's neck one day when she had tried to take a bit too much of a shared haunch. She went still. The instruction held. All the old stories had not lied about wolves. At night, when the castle slept and the white of snow under a new moon made the yard a place of cold milk, Jon stood on the battlement and let Ember climb from his shoulder and clamber onto stone and unfurl herself. Her first jumps from the wall were reckless as a boy's lies. She fell like a thrown stone and then at the last beat her wings with frantic precision and came back to him panting, furious and pleased. Her claws left small, sharp marks where they had gripped stone. The storied Dragonfire was not yet in her, but her mouth blew heat like a forge when she hissed. It would come. All true things had their season. Arya slipped to his side one night with a grin. He had thought to send her to bed with a scold. He handed her a strip of dried meat instead. When Ember took it delicately from Arya's fingers, Arya's pupils widened until he could not see the brown in her eyes. "Ride her," she said breathlessly, and Jon laughed so loud Ghost lifted his head and huffed. "She would throw me off into the snow and laugh at me long after," he said. "I will ride her when she allows it." Not before. Arya chewed on that, then nodded. Needle would cut me if I held her wrong, she said.
Emberisho sword.
A living one. Then we had best not draw her where the wrong eyes can see, Jon said, and Arya's enthusiasm sobered into complicity. The wrong eyes grew everywhere. Winterfell held its quiet. The South did not. Ned walked into a thicket he could not cut his way free of without turning himself into something else. Little thoughts sharpened into little knives. Great thoughts bloomed into wars. The Queen smiled and meant nothing good by it. The King remembered being young and did not remember what youth had taken from him when it left. Messages came and went. When word reached him that a hand no longer had a body at the end of its arm, that steel had done what steel always did, Ned sat down in the small council chamber with its polished table and felt the cry his heart made move up his throat like a fish he did not want to swallow. He swallowed it. He wrote another letter. He did not tell Jon he was proud of him. He told him to take Ember to the gods would every third night and let her sit under the leaves as if they were sky. He told him to make Soot's life long by never demanding he become something he was not. He told him to tell Robb to double the sentries on the east wall and the west one too, and then to check those sentries himself in cold and in dark and in tired. Jon read the letter in the quiet between chores and training and hiding a dragon and feeding another and teaching a small child to braid when Arya's fingers were too rough on the task and keeping himself from breaking into pieces because he had been denied the thing he had thought he wanted. He did not break. It is a mistake men who do not know the young sometimes make, that because a boy wants a thing he will die without it. He wanted the wall the way he had wanted the name father to be different than it was. He lived without both. He put his want into the small shapes of habit and intention. He kept Ember alive. Then one dawn, the cry that issued from the yard was not a goat's panic or a girl's laughter. It was a sound that had not been heard under Winterfell since rings had been made in trees now buried under other rings. Jon stood in the godswood with his palm on a white bark face and felt it pass through him. Ghost's head lifted. Ember's head lifted also, and her mouth opened, and the small heat became a line of flame, thin and bright and clean, that went at once to water, because water was there and water would always be where it was needed. Arya whooped. Sansa heard and pressed her hands to her ears and pretended not to shiver. Robb turned toward the sound with his chin up, calculating and fierce, and kept on walking because a lord learns to let the world come to him on its own feet. Luwin sat down on a bench and put his head in his hands and laughed like a man who had been holding his breath and had forgotten when to stop. In the south, a hand of the king bled on stone. His final thoughts were not of dragons. His final thoughts were of the way his father's voice had sounded when the wind had carried it over a field in a winter so cold it broke the skin on a man's hands and made the inside of his nose sting when he breathed. He thought of snow on black hair and a child's laughter and a door that had opened where no door should ever be. He fell, and the city closed its mouth over him because that is what cities do. The letter that told Jon his father would not ride home did not say how. It did not say who. It said the thing itself in the plainest words a maester could put in a raven's beak and send north. Jon read it with Ember's head tucked under his elbow and Ghost pressing his weight against Jon's shin as hard as if trying to make a new bone there. Jon did not break then either. He went to the godswood and put his hand on the heart tree and did not speak a name because he did not know which name to say. Catelyn came home thinner, bearing scars under her gown a man would not see unless he had time and gentleness to undress them. She did not weep where anyone could find her. Not even in bed, when the dark admitted to itself how much weight it had taken. She took the house in hand. Winterfell is a woman's as much as a man's. It knows how to be held by a female palm and does not care a jot if a man's chain hangs on a chair in an empty solar. She called the banners. She ordered the baking of bread. She sent riders. She sent ravens. She sent prayers into wood and water and did not expect the gods to do anything but break her heart. Robb stood taller because grief does that to boys. He put on a man's sword and it did not drag on him as much as Ned had feared it would. He let Jon stand beside him when no one else was looking. He notched his voice to commands it had never had to carry before, and the yard incanted it back until it fit. When the South thinks of dragons, Caitlin said to no one, and everyone one night late while Lewin warmed his hands on a cup and Rob stared at the map with its stupidly simple lines. It thinks of heat and ruin. It does not think of hunger. Then let us think of hunger, John said, surprising himself. He had stood in quiet as long as he could stand. Ember will want more. Soot will want nothing but warmth, and when he dies he will want it still. More will make it wrong for her. Less will kill her. We will not overfeed. We will not be stingy. Caitlin's mouth had a quirk in it that might have been respect. We will make a Stark of you yet, she said, and then regret flashed across her face, silly and quick and utterly unnecessary. He took the words as a lord takes an oath given in haste, clearly and to heart. That winter, which came early, they learned how to measure a secret in haunches of meat and quiet steps and bent heads. Ember learned that stone will not hold forever. She found corners. She found ledges. She found a shaft that breathed and a shaft that did not breathe, and she went down the breathing one and came up with soot on her nose and anger like a bell, and they kept her out of the kitchens by holding meat above their heads and letting her chase them because she liked to chase and because it made Arya laugh. On the morning the first true snow of the season fell, fat and heavy as feathers, John led Ember into the godswood and let her climb the heart tree. She crouched there, a dark, coiled thing under pale leaves, and the red sap seemed under her to brighten, as if pleased to have a heat above it. She made a noise then, a thin, swift chitter that sounded like bone talking to bone, and the forest lifted its head. John did not know that an old thing under ice turned then and cocked its own head and set its tongue to the gap in its teeth where fire had once taken a bite. He did not know that a man far north on a wall of snow noticed a line of birds turn on a wing and wondered. He did not know that a girl across the sea had burned her hands and been unafraid. He thought only that his father had set a weight on him and that the new shape his back had taken to carry it would not straighten again. He did not despise the weight. He put his hand on Ember's flank and felt the warm, swift breath, the little shift of sinew, the promise traveling through hidden rooms under Winterfell and under the world. He felt Soot's constant near coil of contentment like a low drumbeat telling him that not all fire needs to roar to be true. He straightened. He wiped snow from Ghost's ears, and Ghost stood and shook himself and showered John with cold that made him laugh in spite of himself. The laugh made something that had been holding V. Airy still and very tense in his chest ease just enough that he could breathe without pain. Winter was coming. It had never stopped coming. It would bring teeth and long nights and songs that had been written long before houses had names. But fire lived under a cold house now, and that was a new story, and not a small one. He turned and found Arya standing with snow on her lashes and a crooked smile as if she had stolen it and was pleased with her theft. "When?" she asked. "When what?" "When you let me fly at her side. When she tells me I can," John said. "And not a day before." Arya snorted. "She will tell me first." "She may," he said, and bowed as if to a lady with a knife at his breast. "But you will tell me after. We have to be wiser than the men who brought the last fire into the world." "We will be," Arya said, as if stating that she would eat when hungry. "We are North. We will always be smarter than men who wear chains to keep from losing their heads in the wind." They stood until their cheeks burned and the snow made the world soft enough to bear. Ember exhaled, and for a heartbeat the falling flakes hissed into a little fog and were no more. In King's Landing, a girl with a crown looked east and saw only a war. In Winterfell, a boy with no name that fit him looked down and saw a beast he loved. In the deep crypts, a thin green dragon curled tighter into a warmth that would never leave him unless the world died first. The door that had opened once could open again. That is what doors are for. The dead of Winterfell watched from their stone with the patience of those who have no more need of time. Wolves ran under the trees. A boy did not break. A woman did not yield. A lord went to his death with his honor tied about him like a cloak he would not remove even to keep his head. Under it all, something breathed. Something the North had not borne in memory began to be taught by men who would fail in small ways and win in quieter ones. The world did not bend for them. It stood as it always had and waited to see what they would make. When night came and the branches clawed at the sky as if trying to tear down stars and eat them. Ember lifted her head and tasted the path of the wind. She knew nothing of kings or thrones. She knew the smell of snow and meat and the boy who belonged to her. She knew the warm seams of rock and the cool bark at her spine. She knew a long road that did not have words on it. She knew the sound of a wolf's footfall and the beat her own heart made when she leapt. She leapt then, from the heart tree into the dark and the whiteness and the wind, and the world made room for her.